Jesus, stand among us in your risen power. Just two very short verses of prayer of thanksgiving. Be seated. As God's people, as we enter into the season of Lent, this is the second Sunday of Lent, we are reminded of the fact that on Good Friday, Jesus came and he died for us, but that on Easter Sunday morning, he rose for us so that we might have everlasting life. May the Lord grant us his blessing as we seek to work his will within our lives. Our response is the hymn, Whiter Than Snow. going to sing two songs, I Know Who Holds Tomorrow and Blessed Redeemer. Thank you, guys. And Maria, sorry. Our scripture lesson this morning is found in Luke chapter 2, verses 41 to 52. And our thoughts will be on the fifth commandment is to honor one's parents. So I invite you to stand with me as we hear the gospel read, and Lynn will read it to us this morning from Luke chapter 2, beginning verse 41.
The boy Jesus in the temple. Now every year his parents went to Jerusalem for the feast of the Passover. And when he was 12 years old, they went up as usual for the festival. When the festival was ended and they started to return, the boy Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem, but his parents did not know it. Assuming that he was in the group of the travelers, they went a day's journey. Then they started to look for him among their relatives and friends. When they did not find him, they returned to Jerusalem to search for him. After 3 days, they found him in the temple, sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. And all who heard him were amazed at his understanding and his answers. When his parents saw him, they were astonished, and his mother said to him, "Child, why have you treated us like this? Look, your father and I have been searching for you in great anxiety." He said to them, "Why were you searching for me? Did you not know that I must be in my Father's house?" But they did not understand what he said to them. Then he went down with them and came to Nazareth and was obedient to them. His mother treasured all these things in her heart. And Jesus increased in wisdom and in years and in divine and human favor. The word of the Lord.
The love for God flows into love for other people. It seems to flow that easily within the Ten Commandments. And as one reads the Holy Scriptures, it seems to be the theme that in order to have a proper love for God, one needs to love humankind as well. Or as the Bible puts it, to love one's neighbor as one loves oneself. Since all bear within them the image of the living God, to hate one's neighbor then would be a violation of the very image of God himself. Calvin states about the image of God that in each person, no matter how corrupted one is, the image of God remains. Since God remembers for what end he has created humankind, so we too are to remember the worth of each person, especially the people sitting beside us this morning. It is with that in mind we want to talk the next few weeks about what it means to love one's neighbor. The fifth commandment begins right at home. We ought to love our father and we ought to honor our father and mothers. I've chosen Jesus for a good reason, because Jesus was a perfect child. There's not one parent here who has not been a perfect child, nor have they got perfect children in their home. So Jesus and his parents are off to Jerusalem. Jerusalem, the great city of God, for the celebration now of Passover. And the book of Exodus teaches that all males of Israel were expected to come to Jerusalem 3 times a year, first for the Passover, then for the celebration of first fruits, and then for Thanksgiving, the harvest. We know the story well of Jesus coming into Jerusalem, and most commentators will talk about the section where Jesus is sitting with those who are teaching him, and he is asking questions of them. And I imagine they're pretty intelligent questions. But I would like us to use this story for the fact that Jesus and his parents had a relationship. Jesus must have been that that model child, that child who could keep his room clean, who never talked back, who was obedient to Joseph and Mary in every aspect. Now, we're not told this in the scriptures, but we know that Jesus was like us in every way except for sin. So we can trust him in this, that he was probably a perfect child. Wouldn't that be great? I mean, being a perfect child, guys, right? Wouldn't it be neat if we could always make mom and dad happy? Never having them get upset with what we said or what we did. And them knowing that from the bottom of our hearts, with everything that we are, we love them and are obedient to them. Wouldn't it be that kind of a great relationship where mom and dad always did the right thing? Always said the right thing in the right tone of voice? Wouldn't life be easier if both parents and children were perfect and we were able to celebrate family life in peace and grace? Problem is, I didn't grow up in a home like that, and neither did my children, and I'm pretty sure Linda didn't, and neither did you. So it is on their way home from the temple that it gets to be dusk, and the group is traveling in a caravan of sorts, parents probably in the front, the men first, of course, discussing what had happened in the temple, probably. The women behind them gossiping about their neighbors, probably talking about their children. And then in the back there would be the kids, walking with one another. And so really there was no concern about where Jesus might be on that first day until it was supper time. And then Jesus was not there. You have to understand that now they're a day away from Jerusalem. They travel the next day back to Jerusalem. And on the third day, they find Jesus sitting in the temple, in the place where he wants to be. You have to understand, too, that the temple was a huge area. And that in the temple, there were always many people. And so looking for a boy named Joshua was not all that easy. Because if you called, Yeshua, chances are 100 faces would turn towards you. And so they looked and finally find him in the place where the Pharisees sit, where they teach their crew, and a boy among them. Do you remember what that felt like? When you lost sight of your child in a busy mall? Or we've had it in this church. We couldn't find one or two of the kids. Mostly Vellingas, I think. But anyway, where we couldn't find the kids. And we were trying to locate them, and we couldn't find them anywhere. How our hearts beat faster as we were looking. And there the discussion begins. Mary says, "Why did you do that to us? Why didn't you stay with us? Why were you not there with your dad? What in the world were you thinking? You know how frantic we were looking for you? You know how long it's been? It's 3 days now, Jesus. Dad should be home. He should be back in his shop. And here you are." And without them really ever understanding, even though Mary kept these things in her heart, Jesus simply says, "But didn't you know that I need to be in my Father's house?" Happens to all of us, doesn't it? I mean, you older ones can think back of when you were raising your kids. How many conversations parents have had with their own children as they grow up? You know, why didn't you do your homework? Or why do I need to bother you to ask to clean your room? couldn't you possibly help me with the chores just once? Please put away your we and your PS and your DS so that we can talk, or you can study or help out or at least care or play with your siblings for a bit. Or maybe kids, it's the other way around. You complained about the fact that it was bedtime, or that you couldn't finish that game, which was simply the most important thing in your world at that moment. Or to go outside and play with the neighbors, or to clean up your room and make your beds, and we did nothing but complain. But let's go one step further, and let's make this a sermon for all us kids. How many times as adult children didn't we complain about our parents, about how they intervened in the way that we lived or that we raised our children? This sermon, I want you to know, could have been a half an hour longer, because Linda and I had so many ideas on the way home talking about this. I mean, realistically, what does it mean to honor your parents? What does it mean to honor them your whole life long? Not their whole life long, your whole life long. Why did you look for me, Jesus asks. You knew where I would be. And I'm sure Jesus speaks to them with great respect and with great wonder in his voice. Did they really not understand his mission? Did they really not know who he was? And in verse 50, we realize that, no, they don't. They don't understand what he's telling them. Mary and Joseph are ordinary folks, sinners like you and me, who don't understand completely what it's all about. But what is important to see here, that here's a child who is fully God. And that he, as the creator of the universe, now stands up, and now turns and follows his mom and dad back to Nazareth. He was the one who understood the fifth commandment. He was able to understand that he was subject to them, as we find in verse 51. He acknowledges their God-given right over him, however poor their understanding of him might be. I remember when I grew up, it was the generation gap. Parents couldn't trust anybody under 30, and children couldn't trust anyone over 30. Remember those days? Well, that's sort of what it's like here, and that hasn't changed. Kids still don't understand parents, and parents still really do not understand children. But Paul wants to remind us of one certain little fact. Paul in Ephesians says that children are to obey their parents, as is right in the Lord. For this is the commandment with a promise, that your days will be long in the land which you live. Blessed by God, a life blessed by God. It doesn't necessarily mean, as I told the kids, that we're all going to die of old age because we honored our parents. But it does mean that we as parents have taught our children and have been taught by our parents how to live a long and healthy life in the way that we live, the things that we do, those that we hang around with, and the text proves us. The text that we read in verse 52 says very plainly that Jesus grew up in every way. He grew up physically. He became a man who lived for 33 years. He did his work. He did his ministry. Jesus grew up emotionally. He is probably the most emotional, stable person you will ever find in the scriptures and in your life. He grew up spiritually. That means he knew his God. He trusted his God. He loved his God. And he grew up socially, which means that people liked Jesus. Jesus never got into trouble. And Jesus was the very human person that we would have been had we not sinned. He was the person who knew what it meant to keep the commandments. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and you shall love your neighbor as yourself. So how do we, and I'm including all of us, the little kids, I'm including the older kids like me and those who are a tad older than I am yet, how do we learn to become what Jesus was, an obedient child to our parents? And I'd like us to go to the Catechism. And the Catechism asks us the question, what is God's will for you in the fifth commandment? And let's read it together. That I honor, love, and be loyal to my father and mother and all those in authority over me, that I obey and submit to them as is proper, as they correct and punish me, and also that I be patient with their failings, for through them God chooses to rule us. Got it? Okay. I just want to hint three little things from the outline here. The first one is that we honor, love, and be loyal to our parents. In other words, from my parents, I learned what it meant to know God. From my parents, I learned how to cross the road. From my parents, I learned how to eat and to sing. From my parents, I learned what it meant that it was good for me to go to school. I wasn't always good in school or at school, but they taught me. You see, in following their obedience to God, I learned what it meant to follow after them and to honor them for that. And my Father, whether he knows it or not, and whether I've ever said it or not, gave in me that deep desire to stand exactly where I stand today. It was my parents who taught me. But they also taught me to obey. My father was good at disciplining, but I loved my mother's discipline better. My father did it with the rod. My mother did it through counseling and prayer. To both of them, I'm extremely grateful. It meant that I needed to learn how to listen to them, knowing that whenever they talked to me about my life, they kept my best interest in heart, not theirs. It was for me and for my siblings that they chose to come to Canada. It was for me and my siblings that my dad chose to give up what he loved most, and that was the store, so that he could then help his children succeed. And no matter how ridiculous and unfair I thought they were, and they were unfair, and they were ridiculous, every parent is, I honored them. At least I tried to. But I also know that I failed, as they did, and as my children have. You see, I've learned to honor and to love and to be loyal to my parents, so that the things that we talk to our children about now, such as bullying or taking drugs or doing alcohol, even though they're all at the right age to do any of those, I trust they've seen from us and see in us somehow the gift of God to follow after him. And this part brings me to tears. That no matter how bad I've been at being a parent, my children love me. And they've been loyal to me and to their mom. Secondly, that I need to submit to the authority of those people over me. I learned that at an early lesson. I was number, 11 out of 12. And by then, my dad had it down perfect how to discipline his children. But he also taught me that to have reverence for the pastor, for our minister, our domine. He taught me how to have respect for police officers and for teachers. One of my favorite teachers, and I should really tell him sometime, one of my favorite teachers was Mr. Van Weeren. He was the principal in grade 8 when I was in grade 8. He was our teacher in grade 8, and I gave him such a hard time. But you know, when our grade 8ers get together, Bill is there. And it's like having a parent at a school dance or a school potluck or pot blessing. So that we just know, we just understand each other. And I think it was the time that Bill gave me the strap. You kids have no idea what that is. That's an oldie and goodie from school. And I went back into class, and I was laughing because he didn't know how to give it. I was the first child he ever gave the strap to. How I respect him for that. You see, if we want our world to be a better place, then we need to honor those in authority over us. Whether they be the policeman that's driving behind you and your heart's going as fast as you can even though you haven't broken a law, or whether it's parents or teachers or your boss, or whether it's the judges of the land or the government that currently rules. When we, as Christians, are obedient and honor those in authority over us, then we do well. And so will our country. I want to tell my elders, every one of you that I've ever served with, and my deacons, that I honor you. And that's why I take that handshake that we do every Sunday morning so seriously. Because for the moment, for this little tiny moment every week, you give me the authority to speak on your behalf. But you are the rulers of the church. Thirdly, I need to remember that my parents were sinners just like I was, or am, sorry. They were, I am. And out of that comes the fact that they're going to have their shortcomings. Children, our parents are going to have shortcomings. Moms and dads are going to fight because they see life from two different points of view. Moms and dads are going to disagree with you, and you somehow, somewhere along the line, have to learn to listen to what they say. And of course, there are no perfect children. My kids are about as perfect as you're going to get them, so you can't claim that. But we're all wrong. We all get it wrong, even though we have faith in Jesus, even though we trust His Word, even though we're empowered by His Spirit to work out those good things that He gives us, we still get it wrong. So let me put it this way. I didn't answer one of the questions yet. How long do you honor your parents? As long as you live. As long as you live. There's not a child here who has not had parents. And it doesn't matter if you're in the 90s or getting close, or if you're almost a year old. We honor our parents until the day we die. And I say that because they still teach us lessons. My mom and dad have been gone for years, but they're still teaching me lessons. I still remember some of the things that they taught me, and those things still play in my life as I am do it in my marriage, or I do it with my children. I am still there. I still do. I still am obedient, and I still obey. I still love them. I remember fondly the day that I was able to put into a letter an apology to my mother for the kind of kid that I was. And I'm telling you, none of you would ever want me in your home for the kind of kid that I was. I was not a model child. I never wanted to be a model child. Didn't think I would ever have model children. And I'm still not one. So let's walk the talk. Now I got to ask myself this number one question. What can I do better in my life to honor my parents? What can I do to honor my mom and my dad in my life? This is a question for the little kids, okay? Those who aren't paying any attention anymore. But it's for you. What can you do? It's for me. What can I do to honor my father and my mother today? Secondly, in what areas of life do I find it difficult to honor them and to obey them? Oh, I've got mine. I won't tell you them, but I've got mine, and I've shared that my children have theirs, and you have yours. You see, the best way to overcome those things that are difficult is to come to the Father, the good Father, the great Father, the perfect Father, and say to him, you know what, I really have a problem with my mom and dad. Even though they're gone, even though they may be with you today, even though you don't like them today, even though you have a problem with today, what do I do to honor them? And I know the Spirit will give us an answer. And thirdly, what do I need to offer to the Lord in order to honor him by honoring others? Do you see, the whole purpose of the fifth commandment is not just to make your home a happy home or to make your life much easier. The purpose of the fifth commandment is to prove that I love the Lord my God with all my heart, with all my soul, with all my strength, and with all my might. You see how the first four commandments just simply flow into the fifth. Next week we want to talk about the sixth and the seventh. We're going to do it together. You shall not kill. You shall not commit adultery. Partly, I'll give you the real reason. It's because Lent is only so long. But also because I think these two fit together very well. How do I love my neighbor? I need to love my neighbor the same way that I love myself. And Jesus goes on to say that no man hates himself, but loves him. May that be our goal for this week. Think about these questions. What do I need to do to change? What do I find difficult? And what do I tell God?